Hi, Florian Birkmayer MD from AromaGnosis here, and I wanted to record a short video on how to deal with being overwhelmed and why I feel our approach, the AromaGnosis approach, is so helpful for avoiding overwhelm and avoiding hopelessness. A friend and I were talking recently, and he said to me, you've had a really difficult year. It would have been appropriate for you to have a breakdown. And honestly, without going into all the personal details, I agreed with him that it has been the phrase that popped into mind is annus horribilis, and I quipped, I didn't have a breakdown. I can't even do that right. I guess my breakdown had a breakdown, and we both chuckled. And so that sentence that sort of just slipped out, these things that just slip out is often the profound truth, and or a pure message from the unconscious. And so I think there are several meanings or impacts that I take from that. On the one hand, this term, I'm not even doing my breakdown right, I've come to recognize as an ego defense. I have another video and I've talked about ego defenses. And on the one hand, there are ego defenses that happen before, as we get ready to follow the direction our soul is calling us. And so as the soul comes calling, the ego will throw up certain barriers. Uh, Basic examples is the ego says, oh, that's stupid, I'm not going to do that. Or the common one is, I'm too old, it's too late, I can't change now. If those don't work, then it's often fear, like I'm terrified of doing what my soul really wants me to do. The ego will be really good at fanning the flames of this fear. Now, once we have taken steps on this path in the direction our soul is calling us towards, uh, the ego still tries to throw up defenses. This is something I've come to recognize, and one of them that I've come to recognize is the ego saying, "Well, yeah, okay, you're going in the right direction, but you're not doing it right." As if there was a right way, and the ego is the one who gets to decide uh, what the right way is. It's really the ego trying to control it, saying, "Oh, if you're not doing it right, you might as well give up." I think we're all familiar with that. Um, and again, I think it's important. The ego wants to say, "Oh, there's a right way to do this. I'm in control. I'll tell you what the right way is, and you're not doing the right way." And that's a reminder of what this process of following the soul entails. Following the soul means surrendering to the demands of the soul. There's that aspect of surrender. I'm reminded of the phrase, not all who wander are lost, which is out of Lord of the Rings, and another phrase, in the middle of life, I wandered into a dark forest, which is what in the opening stanza of Dante's Divine Comedy. Um, so there's this element of wandering. I mean, even in the alchemical literature and in some of the books, they talk about, and then I wandered in the desert for 10 years. So there's this aspect of not having an ego direction, ego saying, okay, if you want to get there, here's how we're going to get there. There's this aspect of surrender, of wandering, of really frustrating the demands of the ego. And of course, the ego is going to say, no, 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 you're not doing this right. Let me be in charge. Another phrase or term for this sort of wandering process, or certain parts of this wandering process, is the dark night of the soul. And again, all of these imply that the ego is trying, it's a confusing process to the ego, a letting go of control, and a letting go of the how, that there is a right way. And so again, the ego is saying, you're not doing this right. Let me try to control this. And so I think one reason it's important and helpful to think about ego defenses is because when we recognize them, it it means we're actually heading in the right direction, in the direction of soul, instead of instinctively, unconsciously saying, well, I don't want to feel fear and I don't want to feel uncomfortable and my ego is saying this is stupid or I'm not doing this right. If we sort of unconsciously respond to that, say, well, we're going to go back in the other direction. And the ego says, yep, I got my way. I don't have to change. Whereas if we recognize them saying, this is what's making me uncomfortable. This is what's triggering me. I'm recognizing these ego defenses. That's a sign we're going following the soul of the soul. If we weren't doing that, the ego defenses wouldn't have to come up. So again, by being aware of them, we're conscious of them, we don't unconsciously react. There's this phrase that I heard recently that's used in certain circles now. You know you're over the target when you start catching flack. And I really don't want to discuss what this means in other contexts, but in this context, you could say the flak or the ego defenses, and when they come up, or more precisely, when you become aware of them, you know you're heading in the right direction. Your soul's call being the target. I have some issues with that metaphor, but you know what I mean. So again, awareness of ego defenses helps us to recommit to and embrace the process of going towards the soul, following the soul's call, not being lured into complacency, unconsciousness, and maintaining the status quo, which is what the ego wants. Now, of course, this isn't the entire process, but that's why I think awareness of the ego defenses is helpful. And the other part of what I said to my friend is my breakdown had a breakdown, which means to me that this inward focus I've cultivated, admittedly, in starts and fits and seemingly often feels like going in circles over the years, which reminds me of that phrase from The Alchemist about wandering in the desert. Um, but maybe this has allowed me to embrace this process in another way than the classic quote breakdown. Um, I've said often in other teachings and classes and other settings that it's very easy to get overwhelmed right now by the environmental crisis, the political crises. It's so easy to say, what can little me do when everything is so big and overwhelming and inevitable? The state of the environment and the direction it's going in, the political conflicts, the lack of anybody sort of saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. But this is where focusing on ourselves and going inwards, committing to the path of individuation, really working on our personal myth, the ego deepening the relationship with soul, with the unconscious, that inward focus is really a way forward because we can always work on being open to what's ready to come up from the shadow. We can't control what's in the outside world, even if we think we can, but we can always make a choice saying, I'm going to focus on what's coming up. I'm not going to repress it. I'm going to listen to my soul. I'm going to listen to my unconscious. Um, and again, even so, when we interact with the world, when we focus on others, when we are triggered by individuals, you could say classic projection, I can't stand that person. Really, the most fruitful is to say, well, what is this triggering in me? What unconscious aspect am I asking them to carry? And of course, that also works for, quote, the bigger picture, larger system. What are my feelings that I'm projecting into these situations that make me feel so powerless? What's in the shadow of that? And when we keep committing to ourselves over and over again, we can grow and we can work through things. And I think that as challenging as this is, it actually gives us something we can do instead of feeling paralyzed by overwhelm. I recorded a video recently about hopelessness as a privilege I cannot afford. And that hopelessness, I think, is a spell cast on us that makes us feel powerless and paralyzed. Um, Another way, well, what I'm trying to say is I'm thinking of Jung's statement, we become enlightened not by imagining figures of light, but by confronting our inner darkness. The figures of light to me are external answers, solutions, new methods, shiny new things, new teachers, new gurus, they're always going to inspire us, but distract us from ourselves. Whereas if we confront our own inner darkness, that's the way forward. That's the path of individuation. That's the path of personal myth. And that's something we can do even when the outside feels overwhelming. Um, Sort of related, I guess, is the quote from Jung's Red Book, in order for the branches of the tree to grow into heaven, the roots have to grow to hell. So in order for us to grow, to evolve, and maybe in the tree growing into heaven, there's that sort of vital image that there is. I mean, the tree is really a symbol of the path, the world axis, the axis mundi. The tree is really the path between the ego and the self, the ego and the soul. So as we expand more upward, heaven, more union, more sacred union, more deep relationship between ego and soul, the roots have to grow into hell. We're going to have to plumb more and more into shadow issues, the things that make us uncomfortable. And again, that is the way forward, even when it's easy to be overwhelmed. So again, these what I just said in these phrases, really, maybe that's why my breakdown had a breakdown. Because again, the breakdown, you could say the ego is fighting. No, let's not change. And the soul saying, well, I'm going to give you something that you can't resist, a breakdown. Whereas I think we can avoid a breakdown, or the breakdown can have a breakdown when we remember the path. when we remember that the way forward is confronting our own inner darkness. And the other, what this reminds me of is really, again, the importance on committing to this inner path and the benefit of it. I admit, there are things that Jung did in the 30s that are questionable and have, I think, rightfully been criticized, but he kept organizing these seminars where they would read. One of them was on Nietzsche's Zarathustra, one was on children's dreams, some of them were earlier, but every week they would meet and they would talk. And you could say, well, is that navel gazing? Why are you meeting when the political situation in the 30s in Europe is so dreadful and negative and horrible things were happening? But I feel like it's the same idea. By keeping these seminars going, something was kept alive, some awareness, a commitment to the inner process. And to me, and I think I read this somewhere, is it's like if there's a rare flower growing somewhere way up in the mountains, that flower isn't extinct yet. So in a way, we need this process, we need this inward focus, especially when the world around us nowadays, is going to hell because of the climate issues and the political issues. Uh, this is especially when the inner process needs to be cultivated. And that's how we inspire people. The work we do on ourselves, in a way you can't even imagine, will inspire someone else, will inspire someone else. That spark will spread. And that's what gives me hope when it's easy to get overwhelmed. So that's for me, the way to keep dealing with overwhelm is to let my breakdown have a breakdown and to recognize ego defenses and just recommit and be re-inspired on the inner exploration, on the individuation, on the path of personal myths. Thankfully, I've got my allies. I know you can't smell it right now, but with the spring rains, the juniper and pinyon are just really in my nose today. And sometimes I think that maybe my discussions are a little abstract, or the obvious question is, well, how can I do this? Yes, I want to work on myself. And I did want to mention our new Energy and Alchemy subscription. I'll put the link in the comments. It's a 7-month subscription. Every month you get a box of essential oil allies, other aromatic allies, a manual, a video, a daily journaling prompts for each of the 30 days. So you can really practice using the alchemical stages for this process of self-transformation, of individuation, of discovering your personal myth. And, it's a 7-month subscription, but the benefits really last a lifetime. You'll learn these methods that you can keep applying, that you can keep going through over and over again. So just wanted you to have some practical tools and methods. I'll drop the link below. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends about it. If you have particular topics you want me to talk about, just again, make a comment, and I'm always looking for questions that I would be happy to answer. Okay, so lots of love.